Hello and welcome to the Rewind, where we dive into the making and legacy of various films from cult classics to award-winning masterpieces. Today's film is Rampage, the William Friedkin directed serial killer slash courtroom thriller that stars Michael Biehn as a liberal district attorney whose opposition to the death penalty is put to the test when he prosecutes the case of a mentally disturbed young man who slaughtered and mutilated five victims. Joining me to talk about Rampage is Howard S. Berger, film historian, filmmaker, and video essayist whose work can be seen in releases by Arrow Films, Imprint Films, and Kino Lorber, who have released a 4K version of Rampage a few days ago that features audio commentary from Howard himself. So I'm so very glad that Howard, you can join me today to talk about all things Rampage. Big fan of your work, and again, this is a pleasure to be able to talk to you today about what I think is one of the most underrated and underappreciated films from one of the great directors. So thank you very much.
I thank you so much, and I agree with you 100%. I think it's highly underrated, but there's reasons I believe for that, namely the 1992 Miramax
Mhm.
imposition, which I have no value for whatsoever. Other comparative, and some interesting comparative commercial comparisons. So.
So, for people who don't know, this is an interesting movie, Rampage, in that the film was initially set to be released in 1987, and there was a premiere, I think, in Boston. I don't know whether Stockton had something as well. I'm not 100% on that, but definitely was a couple of premieres, couple of appearances here and there in festivals. However, the production company who was behind it, the De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, went bankrupt, which meant that this movie was stuck in litigation hell for like 5 years. Miramax in early 90s, 92 picked it up, released it. So there's like a 1987 version of the film and a 1992 version of the film. Both versions is available on this new released Blu-ray 4K release from Kino Lorber. When it comes to yourself, Howard, which one did you see first? Do you remember the first time you saw Rampage, and which version of the movie did you see first?
It was a blind buy for me. I heard about it when it was in production. Then I heard about, being a freaking follower. I was like, like everybody waiting for it. And I got my hands on a Japanese laser disc of
Mhm.
it, and the minute I saw it, I grabbed it. And my philosophy though is like I don't like to know too much about the movie ahead of time if I've gotten my interest piqued. So I really didn't know anything about it other than the what was going on with the fact that it wasn't being released here yet and blah blah. So the minute I watched it, I certainly wasn't disappointed. I saw everything that I was already sort of pretty much expecting from a Friedkin film. I enjoyed the fact that it was an extremely playful, spontaneous, but very logical edit. And I, as the years went by, when uh, finally I got my hands on that came out the Miramax release when they had their laser disc, I grabbed that. I think I was visiting California. I'm from Long Island, New York originally. So when I was I think it was in California, and we were at a store called Laser Craze, which is very big in LA, and they had couches set up as that many people would be coming in, and the Laserdisc thing was at full force. And they got in Rampage. I grabbed it, not knowing that they had changed the film in any real way, and my jaw just unhinged uh, at the just raw insecurity of the changes. And of course, later on, when I found out the specifics of the problem with De Laurentiis, Friedkin was actually, I won't go too much into this because it's a lot of technical garbage, but he ended up being pretty much screwed over by De Laurentiis,
Mm.
and he somehow was now bound, he was bound to the backers of the film. So he was responsible for paying people unless it wasn't sold. So I think the Miramax deal, it was like they said, okay, sure, but we've tested it and we don't like the audience responses here. This is what we think will improve the film. And he just went, yes.
Mm,
After 5 years, he didn't want to be threatened anymore, I guess, with financial. I'm simplifying this whole story, but basically, that's what I think was going on. And so he just agreed to a lot of these changes. And of course, him being a like Michael Mann, sort of an unceasing Dadaist. He'll just change it, do permutations of his own work. Once it's settled in the mind of his audience, he'll go and you'll never get like an original version. Like finally, we got cruising the way it was supposed to be after years of tinkering, and finally now we're back to the, a good, an amazing, UHD of The Exorcist and Sorcerer, which he with one audio one sound overdub, he destroyed the entire film for me. Now of course it's back in place as an option, an audio option. um he tinkers, so it was he didn't, he just wanted to be absolved of
mm,
the burden of having to pay millions of dollars to people who he was now obliged to. So I don't look at this other version too favorably. I mean, we actually, Nathaniel Thompson, who did the commentary with me, both pretty much under agreement that it was the Miramax version is a very, it takes a lot of what Friedkin's instinctual artistry was, and it ham-fists it, and it is completely insecure. Now, I'm not saying that's something that, this is my preference. How when you grow up with a movie the way the filmmaker does, like it's, I saw that first, and comparatively, I can't help but feel like I hit a brick wall.
mm.
So at the very least, I don't discourage people from enjoying both versions in whatever way, it grabs them. And I'm not saying, I'm just saying that I think what happens is if you go by the later version, what you're doing is you're kind of going to be losing what made the movie the movie. And now it's something else for a
Yep.
different reason. So, going back to what your introduction to it, I completely agree. It's a totally playful, mysterious, sophisticated structure. Um, that because of this whole scandal and seeing the Miramax version usually first, I think has sort of it kind of nulled the validity of the movie on its own terms, because it was a different movie being observed rather than what was the original. And I think the original is just an astonishing thing. And high kudos to Kino Lorber for putting both high, in 4K, both with the equal treatment side by side. So it's not condescending to anyone who prefers one version over the other. And I think that's more important than me giving a preference. I just think that's fantastic.
For me, it was a movie that was always a mystery. So when I first watched it, I was and still am an incredible fan of William Friedkin, but it was a movie I did not know much about because of this inavailability of the film. So it must have been 10 years ago when I saw, I think it was like a version of I think it was the original cut on YouTube. Someone put it up there and I watched it. It was recommended to me by a fellow kind of like film critic person. You go to these screenings, sometimes you catch up with people, you talk about films. We're talking about Freakin'. You talk about the usual stuff, Exorcist, French Connection, Sorcerer, To Live and Die. He brings up Rampage. And I'm like, never heard of it. He tells me the story
Oh,
about it, the inspiration of it. And so I tried to track it down, to buy. I couldn't do it. It wasn't available here yet in Australia. I think this version of the Kino Lorber one will be the first one that's kind of available for Australian audiences to buy. I'm not 100% though. But so when I watch it, the one that I watched was definitely the De Laurentiis cut because you can tell because there was no Miramax logo at the start. It was that De Laurentiis. I feel it was like a dragon, red dragon kind of thing he had as a logo or whatever. And of course now I know both endings, having seen both versions, because it is out on both. I think the Miramax versions are available to purchase on Prime if people want to do that. So having watched both of them, I agree that the first 87 cut was for me the better of the two. And like you said, there's so many various reasons why we had the 92 cut the way it was, the way it is right now. And it is great that both versions are available to watch. And not only that, but available in a much better grade quality so people can watch it and such. Because the thing I watched on YouTube 10 years ago was like a grainy kind of,
Oh, yeah, I
thing.
think probably it was from what was here, so it's probably where the source was a VHS of it.
Probably,
I,
yeah.
I'm not sure it even went to DVD. I think
Hmm.
Laserdisc and VHS, two, there. I mean, I know the V with the, I have the VHS and I know what that looks like. So in retrospect, at the time you think, oh, at least it looks good, and you go, oh, 40 years later, like, oh, maybe, wow, yeah, it's different. I would prefer a nice high def of this one. So yeah, but yeah, it's just too intricate. I mean, we kind of go into it in the commentary, so I don't want to spoil the commentary too much for people, especially if
Of
you haven't
course.
seen the movie yet. But um, it's a movie that when I start watching it, I started something a short while ago. I was introduced to a method of watching a movie. And it's bizarre, but it really helps. It helps me focus on the films when I watch it now. It's at Stanford University. I started doing I think like or through another imprint, started doing these series of books where you watch a minute at a time,
Hmm.
and then you stop after a minute and you ruminate on the minute that you've just watched. So I did that before doing the commentary for Rampage. It was the first time I ever tried this method of just sort of getting ready for a commentary. And I kind of surprised myself. I was just sitting there going like, God, what the hell? Like it's such a sophisticated structure. It's a mysterious structure, which all his classics, that people call. I mean, everyone has their own reaction to a Friedkin film. So not even The Exorcist has its detractors and whatnot. But he's doing some pretty fascinating things. And I think they're all instinctual. I mean, I know I've heard conversations with Bud Smith, his primary editor, and I know that there's a certain expectation uh, has to be sort of like like a real kinetic link between the minds when Friedkin would go into the editing room, because there's a lot of ideas going, and the idea of structuring. And again, we sort of go into it on the commentary, but like the establishment of the place, the characters who dwell in each shot, and how they attach themselves eventually to the story. And then not just to the story, but the metaphorical associations to the story. And in this film in particular, another level, which sort of just recently sort of made me start to go back and examine everything else he ever did, even the films that have been taken for granted, like Blue Chips or Deal of the Century or The Guardian, which I actually think is another extremely exceptional film that he even enjoyed. I mean, Friedkin even was proud of it, which I think it should say something to some people eventually. Um, it 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 has a filmic reference, like almost like a fanboy level to it, which I never thought. I keep thinking in my head, having grown up with these movies, seeing everything from I think Boys in the Band with my family since they came out, like literally infant being held on my mom's lap or my dad's lap watching some of these movies, my memories of watching some, because we were a film going family. I had and I guess we'll talk about it, but like there's a strong reverent Richard Fleischer What? I'm like, and I'm looking at it, and then of course I was reminded by Nathaniel that having conversations with Nathaniel that Fleischer is obsessed with or was obsessed with Richard Fleischer. He had done a fantastic, I think it was a commentary, but it might have been a very long like interview, filmed interview for I think it was a French Blu-ray
Hmm.
of Violent Saturday. And he spoke his mind about Fleischer. And there's a lot of visual references to Richard Fleischer, not just visually, but also in the story. Fleischer, I mean, he had it with compulsion, um, and the oh my goodness, the Richard Attenborough horror of 10 Rillington Place, and I mean, Crack in the Mirror. He definitely dealt with like sordid subjects and violence and murder and justice or the sort of ideas about justice, and he turned them into courtroom dramas that he also did the TV version of Caine Mutiny, which was exceptional, but he somehow found a way to pull in the not just the exploitable aspects, the commercial aspects of genre of like horror, suspense, thriller. He also, because of his affinity for Fleischer as a formative influence on his own filmmaking, you'll start to notice that the courtroom is then becomes a debate of not justice, but sympathy, um, for the not just the victim, but for also the perpetrator, a faith that perhaps is something correctable, like that isn't Clockwork Orange-esque. Is there something correctable in that malfunctioning machine of human thinking? Uh, and spontaneous reason, the compulsions to kill and that courtroom then becomes not just about the incident and the victim and the perpetrator. It becomes a grander thing. You become part of the jury. You become part of the prosecution. You become part of the defense. You become part of the judgment. And that's where you go, what the fuck's name? Like the levels of control and how he has to structure it so that first you're pulled into the story, you're pulled into the incident, and then you're pulled into the characters. Can we talk? Can I give some specifics in the very beginning of the movie? I'm not giving away plot details, but
Absolutely, go
there's a
ahead.
whole the whole opening in where you don't know what's going on. You just see this character in these very beautifully shot sort of autumnal landscapes. I guess Northern California landscapes, and then suddenly again, you just don't know what's happening. It's almost like, the beginnings to the Robert Wise beginnings of like West Side Story or Sound of Music, where you just see it's like an overture. You just see the landscape. You see this in West Side Story. You see the city for like 3 minutes. Well, there's no dialogue, no characters or anything. And same thing with Sound of Music. You just see like the Swiss Alps, and then suddenly he zeroes in on the character, on Julie Andrews or the gangs going through New York. Just zooms right from the overhead shots, right? And I think there is also that, since Robert Wise also did I Want to Live, and he also, his métier was sort of these social realist suspense thrillers and character studies that involved suspense, and meticulous construction. He zooms in on the character, and I'm like, wow, is this? I mean, it's very possible that there's more of this sort of formative absorption of classic Hollywood directors, and maybe even some the more unorthodox directors as well. It doesn't have to be mainly, but the Hollywood directors. I thought his use of their complexity, his understanding of it, really shows off for me a big defense for some Hollywood directors that of a classic period rather than the night, the experimental period of the 60s and 70s.
Mm,
It really it starts to say, wow, Richard Fleischer wasn't a hack. He wasn't, he wasn't just he has a great communication with his collaborators, and he has ideas. And it was actually only after I became very, very, very good friends with his primary cinematographer, Richard Klein, who did Boston Strangler, and I think uh, he did like Mandingo, which he actually uncreditedly co-wrote or co-rewrote with him. Uh, he worked on, Mr. Majestic. I mean, like, he worked on like 8 films with Fleischer from the 60s into the, early 80s. And he said this guy was just like a walking encyclopedia of films for him prior, and he was just concerned about making sure that people had a fair shake, no matter how heinous or how wonderful they are. Either side, there's a balance of perception, and to me, it's very obvious that Friedkin, it was cut from the same cloth. He obviously was someone who really paid attention to film grammar and how you yourself can augment that grammar, um, while handshaking those who taught you these rules in the first place. So in the opening, there's another great bit with setting the place and the time. It looks like it's early November
mm.
in America, autumn, but it's Christmas Day, I think, or Christmas Eve. I'm like
The
something like that.
decorations are up yet on the door and all that stuff
Yeah,
yet, ornaments,
and
yeah.
he starts cross-cutting to the church, on Christmas, the Christmas service, cross-cutting while this guy is inching his way into a massacre in this house, and it's cross-cutting. And you don't just find out that it's Christmas, and you don't just have, you eventually see characters that you know because of their name association. You know they're going to be important to the film, like Michael Biehn and Deborah Van Valkenburg. They're a couple, and suddenly they're in the church. So now you have another subject in the church outside of the fact that it's just a service and there's a priest. And then you go into the fact that, okay, we're now paralleling the prosecution, who's going to be revealed eventually at odds politically, morally, with his boss's requirement for him to prosecute this case. And then on top of that, which again, you're not informed about, is that eventually it's really it ends with the killer drinking the blood of his victims and also having like a psychotic reverie, almost a sexual reverie about it. And you have the prosecutor and his wife, accepting communion, transubstantiation. So you
Yeah.
have, on top of all whatever already, just about establishing the story and the characters, you're now having a balance of morals, of a killer who is trying to achieve that same brainwashed conclusion, that religious brainwashing, as the prosecutor, who you're assuming has developed his moral stance on justice and on compassion and on through his faith. And then you learn that this killer has killed people, kills children,
Mm.
with no compunction. And yet the prosecutor is quote unquote guilty of having the doctor turn off the life support for his daughter.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that's the first maybe 5 or 6 minutes of Rampage, which you have to sit and he lets it unfold so that by 20 minutes in, 15 to 20 minutes in, things are getting clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer until you're also understanding the whole metaphysical scope of the drama. You don't really get that in the De Laurentiis version, which was it's an interesting incident because they said by 1992 the language of cinema had in their eyes degraded to such a point where audiences needed things straightened out. They either were the company was very short-sighted in their faith of uh, the language of film and film going. So if you watch how the new one's editing it, it's like, no, this is like silent. We're buying this because we need a Silence of the Lambs, and you already made it, but they don't
Mm,
understand
exactly.
Why Silence of the Lambs was important. So they're taking some pre-made, repackaging it. Same thing with like Manhunter, which was a decent. It wasn't like a blockbuster, but it was a decent draw. So it had a lot of things. Same company anyway, De
Yeah,
Laurentiis,
that's right.
but it was enough to say, okay, what they care about is where are we? Who is the perpetrator? This is a crime. How brutal this was, and then, you know, what's your stance? But, to me, the original is just this ever uncollapsing telescope of where you think it's right in front of you, but then as you extend the telescope, what you realize what you're watching, there's so many levels that combat each other to make its ultimate point, which is that, you know, by the end of the movie, they're basically asking you, well, what is the difference between the reason for or whoever is asked to perpetrate, like the doctor is asked to legally turn off the life support of this guy's daughter, but here is this killer who has murdered and will probably continue to murder because of his psychopathy and his continued rebellion of treatment, psychological treatment, so that you start to wonder, like, okay, so that means that in The Exorcist, if that little girl was not possessed by the devil, she killed three people
Mm.
in that movie. So what is that now? Where does that now take me? So you have to rewatch The Exorcist and you have to go through it and you have to go, wow, I'm just assuming this is real. But the whole point is it's through the eyes of a lot of extremely vulnerable individuals, except for the detective, Kinderman. So you watch it and you're going like, okay, now I'm weighting it next to where, what he's now revealing to me. What is it? Like 15 years after The Exorcist. And so now you start to go back and if you start looking at his other movies, you're just like, my God, this is so it doesn't have to be your favorite film, but like I always say, like, a director can have many of these, but that's why some people would call this like a masterpiece.
Mm.
Not that it's the best film he ever made, but it's certainly probably one of at least the most sophisticated artistic expressions of just a commercial idea, that has to be pitched and sold. It's that, certainly a director, no reason to have made it that way. But that's why people like Friedkin, because, they sit down and you watch Sorcerer. I was there opening day of Sorcerer, and it was in a theater that Star Wars who had just opened, I think, a week earlier, was
Right.
playing. It was a twin theater. And you heard Star Wars booming on the other side of the wall, and Sorcerer was there opening it. Nobody, zero. I was like, they even were, if it wasn't a twin theater making a mint off of Star Wars, but I'm sure they were probably thinking, can't we boot this dog out of that theater and open up the other theater for Star Wars as well? I'm sure they were probably, there was nobody in the theater. And they were, the guy said, you're lucky we have this thing next door because we probably would have closed the theater if it was one theater. We wouldn't have even bothered. No one's coming in but you. And I'm like, still in junior high school or whatever. I was like 12 or something like that when I went to see this thing. And I was just like in heaven because again, it was a challenging structure. And of course the reviews were mediocre. Everyone was the name like Sorcerer. Nobody, the way they advertised it was a mystery, which was fine with me because again, like I don't pay attention to that stuff. I don't like knowing. I like the taste. And so for decades, that movie was sort of known as like kind of a disappointment, a bomb, you know. And now, of course, you can't say Friedkin without people saying that's their favorite Friedkin movie now.
Yeah.
It's like here in LA, especially, that's a film that whenever it gets brought back to like the New Beverly if at Quentin's theater, Quentin Tarantino's theater, or whatever, very rightfully so. It sells out, and it's a huge pull because it's sophisticated. It doesn't treat you like a moron. It really is. Even though, like Friedkin would do, he even changed that. He's just like, okay, I never liked this ambiguity, or the
Mm.
ambiguity is why we're talking about it now. And he's
Yeah.
so he was very selfish with his experiments. Hence the serious, brilliant decision to not condescend to those who grew up with the Miramax version and are now being exposed to the original. So to have both, I have no qualms with people experimenting with their films. But rain or shine, I think those, what the original, there should be both as many of the versions, if there's multiple versions as possible, on if they can do it through copyrights or even marginally watchable prints. I just think it's a good idea to do what they did is treat them both with equal, and I know sometimes it's not possible, so you have to deal with like if all you can find is a 3/4 inch or a pneumatic, tape of an old cut. Fine for the time being, like Hawaii when Twilight Time put out Hawaii on Laserdisc. And that's a huge truncation to a really interesting roadshow version. They got the roadshow version, but I think it was a standard def. I couldn't have cared less. I was happy as hell. It looked fine, as good as it could get. Now you could probably put that through an AI upscaler, and if there's still but the elements, I don't think those elements exist anymore. And same thing with the Alamo, John Wayne's The Alamo. A lot of these, sadly enough, it's been treated so poorly. The extras that were snipped for the non-roadshow showings, you no longer have them. But as long as there's something available to show people that there's a little bit of when you change something in an edit, you change an idea and a point of view that's attached to those brief moments that you think are just, a few minutes of here, a few minutes there. I look at films very, I'm finding out that I look at things very rather differently than most viewers, is that,
Yeah.
so especially people who buy these things like crazy. Um, I really value any difference that I see. It's why I bow down to people like Tim Lucas every day for investing that fascination with the, even what you consider marginal or not or even obscure differences between film. You can learn an awful lot about not just the film, but the filmmakers, the era, the audiences that accepted or rejected the film. And Rampage, I think, ultimately represents. Um, I think it's one of the best examples of saying, you can really open your eyes with this.
Hi guys, Matt here from Matt's Movie Reviews, letting you know that the Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel has launched channel membership. This provides exclusive videos and other cool stuff as well for all channel members. It's under one tier, one price, and with that one price you get exclusive reviews. For example, I'll be going through the American Film Institute's top 100 movies. So every week I'll do a new review based on that movie list. You can get exclusive reviews based on your requests. Request a movie review and I will review it for you. You'll also get exclusive content for behind the scenes stuff as well. You also get exclusive interviews that I haven't posted yet as part of my podcast, like older interviews with Academy Award winners and other great filmmakers and actors as well, and a bunch of other cool stuff as well. I hope you can all join up, be part of this great experience I have on offer for you. Support indie content creators, support a movie critic like myself who is trying to make it through the content creator space. Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel memberships. Please join and get some great exclusive content.
Great
But when
move. I
it
mean, it's a
comes
great
to
move.
it is, and to go back in regards to the story itself, one thing that also comes up in both cuts is that it's based on a true story. That true story is based on this person named Richard Chase. He was a killer in Sacramento during 1977, 1978, known as the Vampire Killer of Sacramento. Graphic stuff in regards to him. I remember I was listening to a podcast about him, and I couldn't go through 10 minutes because of the stuff in it was just too much for me to. And we watch these movies, but sometimes, like when you listen to the real life inspirations behind these things, you just can't do it. And then a book was written by William Wood. He was a former district attorney of Sacramento. Rampage. That's the thing that got William Friedkin truly interested in the movie. He really liked what he said was the issues in regards to the death penalty, the insanity defense, the role of psychiatry, which Friedkin was incredibly critical about that specifically. There was a interview he did with the Chicago Tribune in 1993. So that would be like a year after the Miramax release, where he was like really just talking about how a lot of times in his profile cases, he said there's a parade of psychiatrists who say on one hand the guy was crazy and alone, others say they knew exactly what he was doing, then the legal system trying to cope with its own way. So for him, that kind of part of it was really important. The death penalty as well, his stance on it in 87 compared to 92 changed somewhat as well. I imagine maybe doing research on this movie would have done so. Because he did have a lot of
I'll footnote
talked to a lot
that
of people. Yeah.
he also uses that
Yeah.
as an excuse for the changes that
In
Miramax were
92.
actually
Yeah.
while obfuscating the obvious reason, which was that it had nothing to do. He wasn't sitting there waiting to change this movie because his
Mm.
political stance had changed.
Hmm.
I never bought that for a half second. I mean, it's obvious that the way that the style was imposed, it's a test audience thing, and he needed to sell it. But yes, I mean, obviously there is he does finally determine a stance as opposed to hinting or being ambiguous or exploring every single character's point of view. It does change in just a few minutes that he's altered. So I just wanted to footnote that there's reasons for that political change as well. But he used that in selling the new version.
There was some controversy back in 1986. So even before draft, he wrote a draft about this. He was doing research, and Friedkin and controversy go hand in hand for a bunch of from you mentioned cruising personally during when you were talking before that film. Of course, had a mass amount of controversy around it. So in 1986, there's this a newsletter, a monthly newspaper called News Rounds, which is the
Mm.
newspaper of the Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago. So Friedkin visits because he's doing research. He visits a guy named Dr. Jim Kavanagh, who works at the facility, and he says to him that he's doing a movie that, and this is in quotes, shows the world through the eyes of a killer who is also schizophrenic. So this little piece comes out, and then it just opens up just the floodgates of like controversy around him, pretty much circling around a lot of people were upset because they were saying that schizophrenics are no more and no less to be killers than anyone else, and you making a film about a schizophrenic as a murderer will really stigmatize people who live with the illness. So a lot of family members, doctors, professors, etc., coming in. So he actually made a little apology and he said, "Look, my thing is that he didn't want to equate murder with mental illness. He says the film deals with the death penalty in California and arguments for and against it. He said, my purpose in consulting the Isaac Ray Center and our professionals in the field is to accurately portray the role of forensic psychiatry in a murder case." And there is, in the movie itself, there are moments in the film where there's a whole thing about, delving into what is it that caused the character of Charlie Reese, who's based on the vampire killer of Sacramento. What caused him to want to do this? And people who know about Richard Chase, they know that he suffered from his thing where he had like paranoid delusions where he felt the only way to survive was to drink blood. And that's why it came to these really kind of barbaric kind of things they did in his murders. And I thought that was pretty
Horrifying.
interesting. Like I said, couldn't listen to 10 minutes of this podcast. This was too much. But I think it is kind of interesting in that here he is trying to research this stuff. And even before a draft is made, I imagine because he's William Friedkin and he did The Exorcist and he did Cruise and everything else, people were going to assume the movie's going to be made in one way or another. And it's kind of interesting because you don't really get filmmakers like that these days, do you? I mean,
No,
Friedkin is like
no.
a very much kind of like almost like a one-on-one in certain aspects,
Yeah.
isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, you watch his movies and the first thing you see is perception. And that's
Mm,
because he himself is a filmmaker who, I mean, he started doing stuff for, I think he did one of the very last episode of Alfred Hitchcock presented the Alfred Hitchcock Hour, which was the second incarnation, like the 10th, 8th, ninth, and 10th year of the series was blown out to an hour. And I think he was responsible for a story. And gee, what did that deal with? Perception of justice and perception of why things. I mean, it's just the same house of cards that he builds up with all his other movies, a perceptual house of cards. Like The Exorcist, of course, you're still going to get these great raging debates that either it is supernatural or it's mass hysteria. You are going to get these things, and one, it's great. It's a great structural device because you are creating that sort of that arena first controversy, that the spectacle of reaction and response to what you saw, what you thought you saw, which was, what a witness has to go through on the set, on the stage,
mm,
in the in a trial where you have to recall, and then how do you recall it? What do you recall? Then you have to make these profiles of not just what a witness saw, or you also have to listen to what you're just talking about. Psychologists, psychiatrists, their determinations, their of that era, of their learning of that era, and then what he also likes to do is, especially in this movie, he did so in The Exorcist too, delve into of that time what scientific methods of proof or what level of technology are we at that can assist in proving what psychiatrists need to understand about the methodology of murder or the methodology of just behavior in general. And so you have these scenes like little Reagan McNeil getting punctured by the doctors and put into CAT scans and tools. You have Reese, the character, the killer in the movie, also being put through the latest technology, so that
mm.
either it can be used for his defense or his prosecution. So everything has two sides to it with a Friedkin movie. You look at Boys in the Band, you look at even something like the Sonny and Cher film. You think this is like a joke. You watch that and you watch the night they raided Minsky's. And again, it's always the two or more sides to every coin, uh, sort of psychology that he uses when he makes these movies. And if you've ever seen, and it was very clever of Quentin Tarantino at his theater when they showed Sorcerer. Oh, it's probably a while now. it was a perfect print, and they showed it. Maybe at this point, it must have been like 6 years ago or 7 years ago, maybe less. They showed it. He was smart enough to show it doubled with a David Susskind produced short that he had done, Friedkin, called "The People versus Paul Crump,"
Hmm.
and it was sort of like his Thin Blue Line, the Errol Morris thing that saved the life of or state of execution of this killer. It's sort of that it operated in the 60s, mid 60s, to do that, to provoke that same rediscussion of guilt or innocence of somebody. And he's employed that in every, so I think the whole idea of a legal defense is one of the first and foremost preoccupations, whether at some point it might not have been in the foreground of his thinking. But most probably it was for all his films, even the most trivial. If he's going to examine a character, it's usually even in something like Blue Chips, or he's still doing the same thing in Rules of Engagement, where there's somewhat of an ambiguity, and everybody gets to sort of figure out for themselves an opinion, a determination, and it's still never. You're just a helpless audience member, so that's what keeps you coming back to the discussion is the fact that he leaves all those discussions open-ended. So as a director, you couldn't have hoped for an ego more proud of the ability to, in how long is Rampage? 37 minutes or less? 34 minutes, whatever version. One's like an hour and 35, one's an hour and 34, but they're different. And there's like 15 minutes of difference in those movies. It's still incredibly impressive, and to some viewers, either overwhelming to the point of dismissive or incredibly embracing. That the style is just something that you're put into the point of great responsibility as an audience member in a Friedkin film, and it's just very impressive that someone could parse that in just minutes. And like I said, when I'm watching the movie minute by minute now, applying this great theory of examination, there's a great book that Stanford, through I forgot the name of the press, forgive me, who put out on Bride of Frankenstein. And the guy went minute by minute of his thoughts of this movie. And you just know that it's such an amazing world within these 90 minutes, or what was Friday Frankenstein, 71 minutes or something like that, that certain directors must just feel like it's a toy. It's just as like I'm obligated to play with my toy. That's why people are obsessed with Rubik cubes and things like that. I think cinema was just with these certain directors, a lot of them, really, whether they consciously thought this or not, I think they all feel like they have this Rubik's cube that they, even if they can't get it perfect, they could still get pretty far in. I mean, so again, without saying too much, I think Rampage is someone who wants to be challenged by a movie and yet pleasured very easily at the same time. Because I think the original one, I don't know if you agree, is it's a really soothing film in a weird way, the way it opens and the way it embraces in an uncomfortable juxtaposition, but embraces these moments that you've been taught since birth to sort of wait for: autumn, Christmas. Um, and then you find as you get older, there's meanings underneath these moments of childhood comfort and reward. You get presents. If you're a good boy, you get presents from Santa, things like this. Or you get a big dinner during Thanksgiving and Christmas. You have families coming over, and whatever you felt about your family, maybe this is a more wonderful because they're going to give you gifts, and grandma's going to give you money, or whatever it is. You start. He knows these things. What does The Exorcist deal with in the first half hour? Is a broken family, right? I mean, it's like what the daughter can't or is growing up repressing because of a broken family. The mother is bitter
Mm.
and is starting to react and reflect all the plans that the father had with the daughter, or the obligations of this family that's broken now. You can't just extract yourself because of a divorce and take away from, and also it's also a way of get of someone who's bitter of probably a relationship she didn't break. She was probably the money maker in the family. So but that's just, again, that's all setting you up for whether you believe what you see, what the characters believe, or whether there's another parallax view of perception that's only sort of once in a while you're allowed to get an objective view of something. And it's not through one person's eye. It's not through Ellen Burstyn's eyes. It's not through, Chris McNeil, the mother. It's not through her eyes. It sometimes is. It's sometimes through the kid's eyes. It's sometimes through the priest's eyes. It's never through the detective's eyes. He's probably because he's Jewish, or it's implied that he's Jewish. There's a certain pragmatism that's floating around. He's even menacing to the situation, and you're going like, well, no, no, it's a good thing. He's the detective. But what's menacing and unspoken now that I've seen Rampage is probably that he can't rule out that this little girl murdered these three people in such a brutal fashion. You cannot do it. You can't say no, but it's not going to be shoved in your face. Now, if Miramax had taken the film and asked Friedkin to redo it, and basically he had done that anyway twice with Warner Brothers, and his two other revisions of that movie are almost nonsensical. One is leaning so far in the other direction of, like, I guess what Blatty, with sort of this at that time, because he is a very skillful director writer, that is up it, but he can become quite ham-handed when given a carte blanche of toying with, an idea like the original version of a movie he didn't direct. And then Friedkin just sort of went in and goes, well, what would this movie be if I satisfied all of the Blatty's, religious, psycho-religious arguments? And then you have, you know, the version you never saw, or whatever he
Yeah, the
called
the
it. Yeah, and then
90
this,
98 99 cut, yeah.
yeah, I don't know how it's marketed, but I remember it's blazoned, the version you never saw, and then someone said, no, that's actually the title. I'm like, I have no idea. But it's absurd. I mean, it's patently absurd, where this image of Pazuzu has splattered of the childhood thing. I mean, to me, if you're talking about language, the way it's set up,
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere.
it's sort of like I really have to sit with this one and try and figure out, like, the degradation of what he started with, and how he's sort of remanipulating elements that weren't designed to be used. And it's like really literally taking square pegs and slamming them into round holes and breaking apart the thing into a new, it has a new shape to it that doesn't oblige what elements they're using to create those pegs to go through the round holes. But again, that he's such a connected director. You can watch all of his movies and just start going, okay, let's start here. And that, again, if once I saw the Fleischer thing, like in the beginning of the movie, in the murder, you see I think it's in the kitchen, the doorway. A great shot.
Oh, right.
The doorway. And we'll talk about this later, but Robert Yeoman, who shot this film, he's become such a favorite of mine. He's done all these Wes Anderson masterpieces. So he's to me, he's this is I love watching him start. So composition was really beautiful in this film, and everything feels like an afternoon in home. It really doesn't feel like a movie. It's not trying to look like a movie or slick it up. But there's this composition where he's already killed one person. Reese has killed one person, laying bodies laying on the floor in the kitchen bloody, and then there's another person who's begging not to be killed, and he steps into frame and it's his legs and it's
Yes.
shot through his mask, and I think that may have been used. I think it had to have been earlier for like I mean, I know it was in Body Double, which is you should never trust De Palma anyway because he's a very sarcastic filmmaker, and so, and then again, in Amy Jones's Slumber Party Massacre, where the legs and you have the
Hmm.
drill bit or the,
Drill. Yeah.
okay, funny phallic joke, and does its job. It's metaphorical and satirical. But in this movie, there's an honest uh, discomfort to that image. It's not getting that metaphor. It's doing something else. It's showing the terrible power of premeditated murder and sadism, yet it's not exploiting it. It's showing it that you see this woman in fear, but there's this powerful masculine symbol of masculinity that right underneath the genitalia, which is the camera. I mean, don't forget this is Friedkin. So phallic imagery is always going to lead back, and violence is always going to lead back to again where your perception is coming from. So this point of view, and that is that was a very important shot in Richard Fleischer's 1971. In England, it's called Blind Terror, but in the States and maybe elsewhere, it was called See No Evil with Mia Farrow, about a blind
Yeah.
girl who comes back. And that was a movie that everyone obsessed on the fact that it abstracted the killer through the use of just showing its feet, in boots and things like that. And that was supposedly just the idea of like, oh, she can't see and everyone in the house gets killed. Well, yeah, that's sort of like what's happening in the beginning of this movie is that everyone in this house is being slaughtered, and but he's now giving you a visual reference point to this other film, who previously, had it also unnecessarily. I always say it's unnecessary because it's unexpected. Is that the director also explores, Fleischer also explores what he always explores: class systems, class differentiations in class. So you have upper class, and I mean, here's this blind girl, but she's got supposedly everything. Her family loves her, wonderful family, but they're so wealthy that this you see the effect that their land ownership has on the local gypsies. It's not playing out like that. It's not turning into some sort of a polemic on class differentiation. But it starts off with the killer coming out of a double feature of violence. In England, the X rating, a little more similarly R rating here, but it was it was saying, okay, sort of like what's the argument when like oh, video games, shooter games, brainwash people. It's sort of suggesting that there is a ramification to the allowance of that kind of violence in commercial entertainment. And I was called rapist murders or something like that. It's like
Hmm.
really, it doesn't even, it's not, it's so unsubtle. But who expects that in something which is just designed to put you in the position of a vulnerable victim, and who slowly realizes that not just is everybody she's ever loved murdered, but she herself now is the last target, and she's blind. So you who can see, it's Fleischer's now obligation to design the movie so that you see it through her eyes, who is someone who can't see. And there's a complexity in that language. So that's why, of course, now you start hearing everyone who was scarred as a child in 1971, who had seen it either on TV in the late 70s or something. Of course, they're becoming upset and they start realizing without yet sitting down and understanding it, figuring it out, why this movie shakes your ground for decades after experiencing it's not because of someone getting killed, or that there's things that you just don't notice that the director and his crew have done to manipulate the complexities of not just the story, but the minutia of staging and sequence, you know. And I say this in the commentary, but it really was wonderful. For me, I had gotten a chance just recently. I was doing work for Arrow Video for the new release that's coming out of Outland, which when I saw it was, yeah, I really liked it. It's all right. What's saw it when it came out. So whatever, it was fun. Not the smartest film in the world, kind of silly cinema logic. But I got to talk to Peter Hyams, the director, and he said something so great because I noticed something in his movies which I thought, and he hates his own movie. He's a pragmatist. He's not like he doesn't walk. I'm sure there's a good while he's making the movie, he's thumping his chest and saying I'm genius, but he really is the most self-deprecating individual I've ever met, which is a good thing when you're discussing cinema with someone who perpetrates it, is that they can still love what they do more than they love what they do. That's like
Right.
that. I like that. But he said to me, I was watching the opening of a movie he did called Our Time, and it's a shot. It's the title sequence. It starts in a a chapel, a church, with the audience of a service, and it's a service given at it's obviously a girls' school, and it's a religious oriented girls' school in the 50s, early 50s, and the camera starts on one thing, and in I think it's one shot, might be two, but one shot. The camera just starts to move while the credits slowly come up one at a time. It's the service uninterrupted. So from the singing of the choir and the audience, the girls in the audience, and then the lecture that the priest comes up and gives. What the camera is moving down one aisle, and then it gets to the front and then pulls back, tracks back, revealing the whole room from that vantage point. And then it starts to go laterally now down the parallel aisle farther back in the church. And it's revealing more until a character enters through an exit door and comes across in the foreground, and which the camera then pans with it and then starts moving down yet another aisle parallel to the front of the church where she drops her books. And then you follow her down again into the front row where she then ends up sitting. And I said to him, that is the second theatrical film you've made. You just did, how long was that choreographed and figured out with the actors? And this was one of the most heart skipping moments I've had in a movie in a long time. And I go, have you ever heard of Hard Time, really? I mean, maybe you may have heard of it, but it certainly was no hit, you know. This is what he decided to do. And I said, what you see what you've done, how much you've done now. You've shown the characters how they behave, how they interact with, they're learning who they are. We don't know who they are, but we certainly are getting an idea of their character and their behavior in this wonderfully choreographed scene. And he says to me, I'm not trying to do a set piece. I'm just looking at what I have. And that fact that every room that you have, that every room has a drama. it has a story, its own story. So my camera work is simply telling that room's story. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, so that's why when I started watching Rampage, which timed out after I had done the interview, I'm watching Rampage, and damn, if I started seeing it not just through Friedkin's eyes, but how he's what he's asked and what was offered by his production design team. Uh, every single thing down to like the Morricone's, when and what the Morricone score was and when it and what the editor's job was. And there are some wonderful things which just sort of reminded me of that throughout the entire film was it every scene, every location really had an amazing imprint to itself and then juxtaposed next to it. Now, early in the movie, there's God, I mean, how disturbing was that the first time you saw the aftermath of the murder? I mean, it's not exploited. It's not trying to go cool, you know. No, it flashes basically. You see like this miserably red tableau in the background with, the detectives doing their job.
In
And then
fact, I
later,
think the most disturbing part of that is the when they have the glass, the measuring cup, in the bag, because
well,
you
this
know
is
what that's for.
exactly what I'm leading to. You have that kitchen, and then
Yeah.
it goes to, you're exactly right, the room where the prosecuting attorneys in this crammed, narrow space, top to bottom, on either side, are all the evidence of so many more crimes.
Hmm.
And they're surrounded, but they have their boxes. And he even picks up the
Yeah.
measuring cup in that scene and shows it. And you're looking and you're like, they have to be so myopic and emotionally detached to think and put pieces together to form, elements of the crime. What does he cut to after that second disturbing scene? First, you have the actual crime scene, then you have the abstracted distillation of what that means. But now you see there's so many more around them that they're myopic. He cuts to the prosecuting team in the in their chamber, their office, with their library, and then you have decades more crimes in the form of these books and these judgments that have been made, legal precedent. So he goes from what evidence is in three successive scenes. I, I just this is what move for me. This is what cinema is. This is what movies are for. It's not to just go and watch great kills. I mean, like I really don't. And the older I got, I started out that way, of course, but I, I I'm overwhelmed. That's why I sort of gave up judgment. That's why I say like, I'm not putting down anyone who enjoys the Miramax version. There might be things because there's always might be things there too, because it still is Friedkin doing that. It's still an experience. It's a legitimate experience. So I can't, at my age, I can't legitimately do that anymore. I would rather examine the differences. I mean, you'll always have your own preference in some way, shape, or form. But I want to make it very clear that even though I really strongly endorse watching the original version, there is absolutely no right or wrong in understanding film at anyone's immediate point. So I don't want to sound like I am flouting, but the observations I think are just so exciting that I would hate people to prefer one over the other without examining both, because I do think that the gift he gave us is that our history gave us, is that there really are things that you can pull out of the changes, the power of having it done. But in the original, I'm just so overwhelmed by the structure of it because it is so learned and so subtle and mysterious and trusting of an audience. And Miramax just did not trust the audience. This is not the opening scenes like Stockton, like the title comes on, like it's about the murder now. It's not like now you're told what it's about, and you're in the editing, you're boxed into just the idea of, it's sort of like a series of single notes in front of you. And on evidence, like, Friedkin wants you to observe it. The original cut is just the magnitude of its observations and its metaphoric, the way he sort of piles it on is just it's a wonder. It's a wonder. And that's what for me, entertainment is now. It's like when you start seeing influence, like again, unexpected influence, and I mean, just go through all the Fleischer's films. You go, yeah, Friedkin is just like, you just imagine that one day, Richard Fleischer just like stood with his legs apart and Friedkin plopped out at some point and scurried away and grew up, and waited to, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful experience. That's what I used to call, like, as a kid, like that's my religious experiences. I never had that with organized religion or anything, but you put me in front of, uh, anything, that you have to watch and determine for yourself, and with no guidance. And it's just that's what, that's how I developed. That's how I live. And it's a wonderful feeling. I'm just so glad that it's here now. I mean, to see the fact that people who probably never even heard of the movie. I mean, like you only fairly recently heard about it too. I mean, it
Very
wasn't like
fairly, like 10 years ago. Yep.
yeah. That's just, it's wonderful for you to sit to think like, oh wow, now this guy's, he doesn't just have the opportunity to see it, but they're both in 4K, and I mean, that makes such a huge difference. The entire, both experiences are now beyond legitimate.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.